Bible surprises in 30 minutes. Why there should be more exclamation marks in this unique book. Writer, church pastor and Bible teacher Mike Beaumont explains all to David Taverner.
In the various titles of our conversations, sometimes they seem to resonate with things we're familiar with. So this time we're talking about The Great Escape, but I guess that's nothing to do with the Steve McQueen film.
No, jumping on his motorbike and seeking to get over the barbed wire at the end of the movie. What a fantastic film. No, we're actually going to be looking at A Great Escape in Acts chapter 12, which is a fantastic story of how God miraculously rescues Peter when he's thrown into jail.
So Peter's in the story. Who else?
Well, the other key player who sets the whole thing in motion is King Herod. Now, that's not Herod the Great. This is King Herod Agrippa, who was the grandson of Herod the Great, who ruled this area at this time. And chapter 12 begins by telling us that it was around this time, it says that King Herod Agrippa arrested some who belonged to the church, intending to persecute them. So we've seen earlier in Acts persecution on religious grounds. We've seen the Jewish religious authorities, the Sanhedrin, turning against the early Christians as early as chapter 4. But now, added to that religious opposition, now we're getting political opposition, political persecution.
What's the threat to Herod Agrippa from these Christians?
Well, Herod, of course, technically is the king of the Jews. Of course, the family were not really Jewish. They were Idumean, so they were half Jews. But, you know, he feels he's there to represent the Jewish people. But to be honest, the real reason was that all the Herods knew how to curry favor with the people that they wanted to curry favor with. In fact, the account in Acts chapter 12 goes on to say that he had James, the brother of John, you remember one of the 12 apostles, put to death with the sword. And when he saw that this pleased the Jews normally means the Jewish religious leaders in the New Testament, he proceeded to seize Peter also. So really what lies behind it is he was a man pleaser. He would do, you know, whatever got support. And this persecution of the Christians absolutely got the support for him from the Jewish religious authorities.
And not to skip over that last reference there, he basically got rid of those Christians with the sword. I mean, this wasn't just, you know, trying to make life difficult for them.
No, absolutely not. This is martyrdom. This is having to give up your life for your faith, which, of course, Jesus had warned them could happen. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they'll persecute you, he'd said. And the early church is now starting to see this happening. It's interesting. It runs in parallel, doesn't it, to the incredible explosion of the church that we've seen in the book of Acts. But that explosion of life and faith and seeing people come to Christ comes at a price. You know, we're not very used to paying the price in the West. Churches in places like China and India and North Korea know that they're going to have to pay the price very often of following Jesus. And for us, we've been exempt from that, really, in the West for many, many years. But here, the early church is absolutely experiencing it. Tremendous growth and blessing, but also the growth of tremendous opposition, at first religious, but now political. And of course, the point about it also being political is they most definitely are the ones who do bear the sword.
So in that context, with that barbarism going on, how does Peter fare?
Well, as we just read there, when Herod saw that James's death carried him some favour, he has Peter arrested and jailed too. Now, I think we cannot overestimate the surprise, in a bad sense, the shock that would have been for the early church. Remember, Jesus had said to Peter, "You're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." He was going to be the foundation of what Jesus would build.
Because Herod here is picking out the ringleaders.
Ah, absolutely. I mean, he's wise in what he's doing. The thing about the Herods is, they were a nasty bunch, but they were also a very shrewd bunch. So when he went for James as one of the apostles and now went for Peter, he really knew what he was doing. He's obviously hoping to cut the head off of what he saw as the monster. So a very shrewd move on his part, devastating on the part of the church, of course. They've taken their leader, the one that Jesus said was the rock. So they really would have felt incredibly shocked and shaken by this.
Whereas on the one hand, he could put one of these ringleaders to the sword, literally kill him. He's not doing that with Peter.
No, it was probably his intention. He wants a bit of theatre out of this. Let me read just a couple of verses for you from Acts 12. When he saw that this pleased the Jews, he proceeded to seize Peter also. This happened during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and after arresting him, he put him in prison, handing him over to be guarded by 4 squads of 4 soldiers each. Herod intended to bring him out for public trial after the Passover. So what he's decided to do here is to throw Peter in jail so he can then have his bit of public theatre and, at this grand festival of Passover, when, remember, all Jewish men were gathered in Jerusalem for that festival. And that would, what an opportunity to have people see that you, Herod, had taken this step, ruthlessly standing up for truth. That was a good sort of vote winner, as it were, in inverted commas.
So in making a spectacle of Peter, that would also create an atmosphere of fear.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely what he would want to do. Of course, what it does is we read on that while Peter was kept in prison, the church was earnestly praying to God for him. Don't know about you, David, but I've discovered in my own life over the years, sometimes it takes a crisis to drive me more to prayer. And sure, we pray and we're talking to Jesus, along the way through life, but it's like when something dramatic happens, it can drive us to our knees to think, oh my goodness, I really need to seek God here. We know that the early church was a praying church. We've seen examples of that in the early chapters of Acts. But here now they're really driven to prayer. So we've got this sort of contrast. They're deeply in prayer. Peter's in jail. By the way, well and truly in jail, did you know?
I was going to say, the facts speak for themselves. How many soldiers is it taking to hold him?
Well, did you know they're 4 squads of 4 soldiers each? So that's really 4 for each of the watches, the periods of time that the Romans had. So he's always got 4 soldiers with him. As we read on in the story, we discover that 2 of them are actually chained to him in the jail and 2 of them are outside at the doors.
I'd say he was outnumbered.
Oh, yeah, I would think you're probably right there, David. The whole point of that, of course, there is no way that this guy is going to get out. Herod is going to keep him and he's going to put him on public display and he's going to milk this for every ounce that he can get out of it.
So what happened next?
Well, this is where the real surprise in the story comes. I suppose the first surprise is the fact that even Peter has been arrested. But the big surprise is about to come, and maybe the best thing we can do is read the story. In Acts 12, verse 6, while the church is busy praying, this is what's going on. The night before Herod was to bring him to trial, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers bound with chains, and sentries stood guard at the entrance. Suddenly, an angel of the Lord appeared, and a light shone in the cell, and he struck Peter on the side and woke him up. Quick, get up, he said. and the chains fell off Peter's wrists. Wow, just pause there for a moment. I love that detail, by the way, of the angel sort of, hit him on the side, thwacked him on the side. The guy was clearly sound on. And, he suddenly gets this thwack, out, wakes up, and what's the first thing you see? You see this angel.
And he's chained to these two soldiers either side of him, but they don't wake up.
Yeah, amazing, isn't it? So they don't wake up, even though the chains have dropped off. There's this angelic figure in front. Do remember, by the way, angels don't appear in the Bible with white robes and feathery wings. More often than not, they appear in human form. So my guess is that, that Peter thought this was some guy who had come in to help him escape at first, at least, particularly as he's waking up. You know how it is when you first wake up suddenly and you're rubbing your eyes and what, who, when your alarm goes off too early or whatever. Well, let's read on. The angel said to him, "Put on your clothes and your sandals." And Peter did so. "Wrap your cloak round you and follow me," the angel said. And Peter followed him out of the prison, but he had no idea that what the angel was doing was really happening. He thought he was seeing a vision. So all this is going on, and he's still not convinced it's real. He's just he thinks he's in a really, really vivid dream, we might say. Well, they passed the first and the second guards, and they came to the iron gate leading to the city. It opened for them by itself, and they went through it. And when they walked the length of one street, suddenly the angel left him. And Peter came to himself and said, "Now I know without a doubt that the Lord sent his angel and rescued me from Herod's clutches and from everything the Jewish people were anticipating." It's only at that point that he realizes, oh my goodness, I've just had an angel come and free me from jail. What an incredible surprise for him that day.
Two thoughts. One is, first of all, the church is still praying during all of this. So the meanwhile is that this is all happening while they're praying.
Isn't that great? And do you know what? When we are praying, we have no idea what God is doing while we are praying. That's why it's just so important. Stick at it, even if you don't think you've seen any change yet. Remember, they're praying. They don't think they've seen any change, and yet God has already acted. So, a real encouragement there to us to keep praying, even if you don't see apparently any result yet.
And secondly, the way that the story unfolds, you couldn't make it up. And this reference to this angel that you said won't have wings, won't be bright white with a halo around them, just looked, by the sound of it, like somebody that in his bleary-eyed he just followed.
Yeah, absolutely. Just like a human being. There's so many examples in the Bible where people encounter angels and they think it's a person, it's a man. And it seems to be as though they take that shape to appear. And yet so often then at the end of the story, the person realizes it was an angel. I actually think I've had an experience of that myself. I was in India some years ago. It was actually a year or so after 9/11 when the Twin Towers were brought down and America went in to try and, as they saw it, sort out the problem in Iraq. And I happened to be in India. I was in Mumbai, which is normally a very busy city, but it was a day when the city was pretty deserted. I think it must have been a holiday day or something like that. And as I was walking across a street, a beggar sitting on one of the sort of traffic islands between the two sides of the traffic, as I passed him, suddenly started shouting after me in Hindi. And it was getting louder, and I thought, I don't know what he's saying, but it is not sounding good. And I turned round to see him chasing after me with a great big thick stick. And I thought, this does not look good. So I thought, quicken your pace, Mike. I didn't want to go straight ahead and straight down, because straight ahead of me went steps downstairs to a subway, and I thought I could get trapped there. So I turned left sharply at this big crossroads to cross the other road. And he sort of cut the corner, to try and get in front of me. And he's now got his stick raised up, coming at me, when suddenly, out of nowhere, in a street that had been deserted, this tall guy, must have been sort of 6'3", tall guy, stood and came between us and turned and sort of held his arms out towards his sides and looked strangely at this guy as though to say, "What are you doing?" And I just thought, I don't know who he is, but I'm just glad he's come. And I ran and I went inside a really high-class shop where I knew he wouldn't feel he could come. And as I got to the shop door and turned round, the guy who'd intervened had gone. I looked up and down the street, nowhere to be seen. And I honestly think that was an angel that God had sent to protect me on that occasion. So, hey, these things still happen.
Amazing. And in this story with Peter, the sequence of events, as I said, is almost unbelievable.
Yeah.
That he just walked out of the jail past everything, past every obstacle that Herod Agrippa had apparently put in his way.
Absolutely. It's miraculous, isn't it? You know, from the chains dropping off his wrist to the soldiers staying asleep, to the prison door opening so he can get out of it, to the soldiers just not seeing him as he passes, to the door of the jail springing open on its own and them walking out into the street. I mean, you think, oh, come on, can this happen? Well, do you know what? Yes, it can. Some years ago, when I was pastor in Oxford at the time, I had the privilege of interviewing in a meeting a guy called Brother Yun, who's written a story called The Heavenly Man, a Chinese Christian who had been persecuted for his faith, locked up in jail. And he has stories of how exactly this same thing happened for him, and this fascinating story of literally how God's eyes were blinded, as it were, and he walked past them and they didn't see him, and doors literally sprang open, and God miraculously freed him from jail. And if listeners have never heard his story, getting hold of that book, The Heavenly Man by Brother Yun, is an amazing story to read of a modern day example of that rescue that God did for Peter that day.
So what an amazing surprise for Peter. Where did he go after he got out of prison?
Well, obviously he needs to find a safe place to go now, doesn't he? So I love how the story goes on. Verse 12 says, when this had dawned on him, when he suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I've just been released by an angel, haven't I? He went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark. John Mark, the author of the Gospel of Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. So he goes to a safe house. He goes to the home of Mary, the mother of John Mark, obviously a home where Christians gathered in those days. So he heads for there. Of course, that's where the church is holding its prayer meeting, still praying for him to be released. And this is after, if you like, the drama of that story. The next bit of the story is full of surprises, but they really are such funny surprises. He knocks at the door or at the gate door of the house, and the maid comes to the door, a young girl called Rhoda, and he calls out to her, says, it's me. And Rhoda recognizes Peter's voice, but the Bible says she was so overjoyed that she ran back without opening the door and exclaimed, Peter's at the door. So there's this guy saying, bang, 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 it's me, let me in. Oh, it's Peter. And she goes off and even forgets. She's so surprised.
Because this is the very person they're praying for.
Absolutely. And she would have been in that prayer meeting, no doubt. And yet she's left him banging at the door. So she breaks into the prayer meeting. I mean, imagine, put yourself in the scenario again, as we've said so often. There you are, earnestly seeking God, praying. The door bursts open, and Rhoda, the servant girl, says, Peter's at the door. Of course, that's what they've been praying for. And rather than, this is so funny at one level, rather than saying, praise God, our prayers have been answered. No, what we read is they say, you're out of your mind, they told her. Funny, isn't it, how we can pray for things and pray for things, even pray for things for years. And then when it happens, it's almost like it's too good to believe, too good to be true. I can think of times in my own life when I'd have to own up to saying, yeah, I've been like that. But they just don't think it can be him. And she keeps insisting it is. And they say to her, well, it must be his angel. What's going on there? Well, there was a Jewish belief that people had guardian angels. And they're assuming that what you've seen must have been the guardian angel of Peter rather than he himself. Meanwhile, of course, here's another meanwhile. Peter kept knocking. He's still there. It's me. And imagine he's looking over his shoulder, making sure those soldiers aren't coming after him. And when they opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. Again, isn't it funny that this is what they've been praying for, and yet they're utterly astonished?
We can pray to God for surprises, and then God surprises us, and we don't recognize it as a surprise.
I know. We're a funny lot, aren't we? We really are. Well, they were the same, and eventually they let Peter in, and we read on, Peter motioned with his hand for them to be quiet, because you can imagine, again, the hubbub, can't you? He is Peter after all. And then they're turning to one another, and God has answered our prayer. And of course, I knew he would, of course. We're very good at doing that, aren't we? So he motions for them to be quiet, and he described how the Lord had brought him out of prison. And he'd said, tell James. Now, clearly this is not the James who's been executed. This is James, the brother of the Lord. Tell James and the brothers about this, he said. And he left for another place. He wants the other leaders to know that he is safe.
The other ringleaders, in a sense.
Oh, absolutely. He wants them to know that he's safe. God has acted on his behalf. He's been freed. Wow, what a whole bunch of surprises for them that day.
Yeah, what an amazing sequence of events. Peter, though, is, in a sense, still a little bit on the run, isn't he?
Well, absolutely, which is why, it ends up saying there that he left for another place. Note it doesn't even say where. For a little while, he goes into hiding. Why? Because obviously, the first thing that they'd want to do when they find he's gone is to try and track the guy down. And in fact, Luke tells us at the end of this story, the meanwhile of what now was going on at the prison, of course, where he'd been kept.
I was going to say there are going to be some ramifications for the soldiers, and Herod's not going to be a happy man.
Oh, Herod is not the sort of man who suffers fools gladly. Because we go on to read that in the morning, there was no small commotion among the soldiers as to what had become of Peter. That's really understatement, isn't it? I tell you what, I bet there was an awful lot of blame shifting. I thought you were staying, awake for the first hour. No, I said you'd stay awake for the first hour and I'd have a kip. There'd be an awful lot of blame shifting and commotion. Well, after Herod had a thorough search made for him and did not find him. Now, clearly there, the thorough search is not just in the jail. I imagine he had soldiers going through the whole city. He cross-examined the guards and ordered that they be executed. This was a man you did not mess with. So some surprises there for Herod, and certainly surprises for the guards who should have been watching out and who weren't.
So in a sense, though he thought so, Herod wasn't really in charge.
Absolutely not. It's fascinating, isn't it? He had become accustomed to saying jump, and the only response was how high. He was a ruthless man. His whole family had been pretty ruthless. And so for him, this must have been an incredible shock to discover that something had happened that he had no control over. But it's interesting how chapter 12 of Acts ends, because Luke goes on to tell us actually what happened to Herod, and it's just worth taking a moment to look at that. We read that Herod went from Judea to Caesarea and stayed there a while. He'd been quarrelling with the people of Tyre and Sidon, and they now joined together and sought an audience with him. Having secured the support of Blastus, a trusted personal servant of the king, they asked for peace, because they depended on the king's country for their food supply. On the appointed day, Herod, wearing his royal robes, sat on the throne and delivered a public address to the people, to this group who'd arrived to meet with him. So what's that a picture of? Power, splendor. I am the one in control here. You are the people who are humbly coming to ask if I will be gracious to you and help you in your situation. And of course, they play along with him. They shouted, "This is the voice of a God, not of a man." And immediately, because Herod did not give praise to God, an angel of the Lord struck him down, and he was eaten by worms and died. He got a disease of the intestines that would lead to his death. But, Luke adds, the word of God continued to increase and spread. Why? Because there is no power that can resist it, no jail that can lock it up, no ruler that is greater than King Jesus, who sits on his throne and who works all things out for his good purpose.
You've been listening to Mike Beaumont in conversation with David Taverner. Bible Surprises in 30 Minutes is a United Christian Broadcasters production. For more about UCB, go to ucb.co.uk.